Welcome back to my channel. It is G here, and I have gotten lots of questions, feedback around some of my videos about short-term rentals and just basically growing a rental business. I'm going to talk a little bit today about long-term renting versus short-term rentals, things you might want to consider, why you might want to do either or, and it should be interesting. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I have more on these topics around rental, growing business, what I'm doing here, and how I'm making my money. So yep, subscribe to the channel, and we're going to talk about long-term versus short-term rentals. Okay, so you have a property, you want to rent it. The most traditional thing to do is find a tenant, get a lease, lock them in for a year. It feels safe, it's what you want to do. Short-term rentals are a little riskier, right? So you have the possibility that no one will rent your place for any given period of time, and that is scary. So long-term rental feels more secure. You know what money you're going to get. There's different ways you can start thinking about doing long-term rentals versus short-term rentals. If that's something you want to know more about, tell me in the comments and I'll make a video about it. But one of the things, now I started doing when I first left the US and I decided to rent my property, I started doing long-term rentals. Actually, I had another property when I was living in the US that I was already doing long-term rentals in, and that turned into a very interesting thing once I left. Like, you would think it was going to be easier, but I think I talked about in one of my other videos about having a team in place, and my renter who had been there for several years decided to leave, and that basically let me know how important having a team was, because I was abroad when she left and a lot of variables were missed. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to talk about like all of these things. Now, one of the things you need to consider as you're navigating, trying to decide, is of course your risk reward threshold, as well as your ROI, your return of investment. So he wants to come outside, but he doesn't want to come outside with me. He wants to be outside with you. Or he wants to fuck with my video. Yeah, he wants to fuck with my risk reward. Let's talk about that a little bit. Now, like I said, you when you have a short-term rental, you do have the potential where you might have empty nights. You might have all kinds of hair in your video from your partner. You run the risk of having empty nights, right? So you have to find the balance financially that makes sense for you. You're also covering all of the bills, right? So when you think about what you can get on a nightly basis for your property, you have to think of not only just like if you still have a mortgage or something like that, but you're also paying utilities, you're covering internet, you are filling the house as though someone's living there, but you know, for your short-term rental business. So you have to basically treat the house like you're going to be there. This isn't working. Y'all fucking up my train of thought. So that's the risk, right? The risk is you might have empty nights in your place. The reward, however, can be that you can charge more for the nights that you actually have it booked to make up the balance, right? So you have to really pay attention to your finances, time of year, because where my property is, I definitely have a downside in the winter, right? And that's when I'm looking and hoping for someone who's coming in and booking longer term versus the summertime where I'm making more money, I have more turnover, and I'm able to raise the prices a little bit more. This period with COVID is really, really an outlier because ultimately I've had to do what I had to do to get people in my property, and that was pretty much bringing my prices down to almost cost, and trying to maintain a certain aspect of. This is always a mess over here. I come out here on the balcony to be by myself because all of my videos have babies and noise in the background, and I'm like, okay, I come out on the balcony. I come out here to be by myself, and you see what happens. They just keep coming. All right. And he's coming back. He doesn't actually. All right, let's go. So as you are deciding that, you have to really create the balance because you have all the other maintenance of the property. Now, this is of course if you have a house and you own the property. Now, there's all kinds of different things that happen with condos and, you know, buildings that are attached to people, and you have an HOA, a homeowners association, something like that. This can change your whole idea. You might not even be able to do a short-term rental if you have an HOA, homeowners association, who doesn't agree, right? Some places are limiting the amount of people who can do short-term rentals. So if you're in a big building and they only say like 10% of the people, and people have already done it, you might not be able to get in there and do it. So it might not even be an option for you. And that can also affect long-term rental if you're in a condo or townhouse where you have homeowners associations that affect the rules around subletting. So you have to be very attentive and pay attention to how that could work. So that's how you can start talking about your risk reward. There's also risk reward with long-term renters. Yeah, you think you get a lease, you think you just put them in there, you think everything is, you know, set to go in dandy. Well, it can be. However, having long-term renters puts you in a whole different thing, especially depending on the state or city laws, bylaws, blah, 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 that you need to pay attention to when you decide to rent your property. Now, it doesn't necessarily affect short-term rentals, but it could, depending on the laws and bylaws. So, for example, sometimes if you're doing short-term rentals, you might not want someone who wants to stay a few months because, depending on the state or the city and their laws around renting, that few months could give them the same rights that someone who has a long-term lease has. You need to know that. You need to know. So, do you hear how excited this baby is at the gems I'm dropping? He's like, wow, wow. So, all that to say, you need to know the laws of renting and the landlord rules, and the tenant rights, all of those things. You need to know them for long-term or short-term rentals. Like, you really, really do. So that aside, I'm going to tell you a story, and this is one of those things. Now, in the state where I had my first rental, man, it went sideways. So me and my really, really good friend were like, we're gonna do this thing. We were, you know, young, and we went head first into doing a property with a bit of renovation. More story time. My very, very first rental, went in on a property with a friend of mine, and oh my God, stuff went from sugar to shit real quick. What happened was, we got a place that was supposed to be renovated already, and we found out they did not do the plumbing all the way up to the second floor. hmm So when we went to view it and we did the inspection, nothing was turned on because it was supposed to be a totally new renovated situation, and they hadn't turned on water or power. So we had the inspection, and again, we were in our 20s. We didn't do a lot of things that we should have done, and looking back on things, you know, hindsight is always 20/20. And you learn from your mistakes, but it was a terrible thing. So we ended up having to invest the money that we didn't expect to invest to get the plumbing complete. So that was the first thing. And then we finally got our renters, right? And I'm going to do a whole video on what you should and shouldn't do with renters, because I have learned so many things over time. But needless to say, we moved in people, and one renter stopped paying her rent, of course, right? She kept giving us excuses, and it turned into a whole mess. And she ruined the apartment that she was in. The other renter, who was on Section 8, she was a hot mess because she kept reporting us to the Section 8 people for any minor thing. So, you know, any minor thing that would happen, she would report it. She wouldn't call us first, and she would just report us. So, you know, she ended up having mice. Like I said, the apartment was brand new. She probably brought the mice with her, but she didn't tell us that there was a mouse or mice, so we didn't know. But she reported us, and then we don't get our money, and it was a whole thing. Long story short, when we got all of these people out of the apartment, and we decided to sell the building because it just turned into like a hot mess. We did make a small profit from the sale of the building. However, it was not enough to outweigh there was not enough reward for the troubles, the risk, the pain in that butts it all became. But what ended up happening was one of the women sued us. And this is really what's important, is that when you are in a state that is more tenant friendly, you can get sued for anything. And the issue becomes your issue as the owner or the landlord to prove that you didn't do these things. So whether the lawsuit is frivolous or not, it doesn't matter, because what happens is a lawyer will take their case for free. You will end up having to pay their lawyer's fees as well. Yeah. And you have to also prove that you didn't do whatever it is that they said you did. And what this person did, this lawyer did, they just hit a whole list that they were suing us for. It was like 100 different things. And we ended up getting a lawyer, and out of all of these 100 things, there was one thing we couldn't prove. One thing. And that was a co-mingling law. So basically, and we didn't know this at the time in our state, is that you cannot put their security deposit in a account that you pay the house bills from. So we had a security deposit, we put it in an account. It was the same account that we were just doing everything with this building with. We didn't spend her security deposit. We did give it back to her, minus some things that were damaged in the apartment, which we had told her in advance. So this is why she sued us to begin with, because we didn't give her entire security deposit back. And this co-mingling thing was the one thing that they got us, because we didn't know better. And it's not, you know, it's not even something you would think is a big deal, but that's what it was. So we couldn't prove that we didn't commingle the funds with other funds, and therefore we had to pay some sort of settlement. And that's like one of those things where it's just like, wow, okay, this little thing kind of screwed us. It wasn't a ton of money that we ended up having to pay, but we had to pay something, which was a pain in the butt. Even just going through the whole process. So all that to say, you really need to understand the laws of the state or city in which you are renting your property, so that you can be as protected as possible and you don't make any mistakes around anything that's associated with your tenants. So that's a long-term rental thing. Some key things that you should know. Short-term rentals, one of the things that you really have to understand is management. So with short-term rentals, like I said, you still need to know those long-term rental laws, because if you have someone in your property for a few months, they could end up with the same rights, tenants' rights, in the state that a long-term leasee might. And on top of that, okay, short-term rental, you need to make sure that you can manage all the details, because you have people coming in, coming out, and especially if you're not there on a full-time basis, that can really adjust how your ROI, because you got to pay people to do all of the things that you might do on your own. But if you're there, that kind of takes away some of those aspects, and you can manage certain things on your own. So when you're deciding this is really one of the key things to build your team around and to understand what is what when you're doing your short-term rentals. So you have to look at all of the aspects of your investment at the time, right? So one of the key things to consider is how you can manage all of the details associated with people coming and going, the cleaning. You need to make sure that you have a good team on your side to help you navigate through a lot of the details associated with a short-term rental. Now, it's a bit messier in some ways, but if you can manage to have all of the details taken care of, as well as making sure that your investment, what you're able to rent your place for, is really going to cover your bills and give you a bit of profit, then by all means, you're going to probably make more money on your short-term rental than you would on a long-term rental. If that's something you're interested in, making profit. Some of us are, some of us aren't. But you definitely have the opportunity to make more money with a short-term rental, just because you can adjust prices. There's, seasonal rates. There's lots of things you can do to add to your short-term rental to add value as well. So, and you know what? I'll talk about that in another video. But when you are looking at this, remember, pay attention to all the details, because there are now, the city has gotten involved because of hotels and everyone lobbying that Airbnbs or short-term rentals are taking funds from their pockets. And so a lot of cities and states now have different ordinances around, guess what, short-term rentals. So again, in my state, where I have my property right now, there are rules about how I can navigate my own property. It has to be all these different things associated with being able to do short-term rental in my property. So, and you just have to know. And a lot of states also now require you to register with the city where your property is located, so they can track you. So there's taxes and all of these other things that they are looking to add or take away from your pocketbook. So you definitely have to look at the ROI for all of these aspects of your short-term rental business. Okay. Those are the highlights of making the decision between long-term, short-term rentals. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be talking more on these topics, as well as kind of venturing out on some of the other business aspects that I'm working on in growing my business from abroad, of course. But go ahead, subscribe. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, go ahead, leave me comments, leave me questions. If you want to know a certain topic, a certain thing, experiences around the rental business, let me know. I'm going to be doing a video. My next video on this topic is probably going to be about how you can grow a short-term rental business and not own property, because not everybody owns property, right? All right, so that's it. That's G. I'm G. And ciao, ciao for now.